When Sergeant Isabella Castillo walked onto Camp Thunder Ridge's precision marksmanship range that humid Tuesday morning, the veteran snipers took one look at her perfectly applied makeup, manicured nails, and the small pink hair tie securing her regulation bun, and wrote her off as another pretty face playing soldier. What they didn't know was that in less than 4 hours, this too feminine sergeant would deliver the most flawless sniper performance in the base's 15-year history, leaving every single one of them questioning everything they thought they knew about what a real marksman looked like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete walkways of Camp Thunder Ridge, a sprawling military installation nestled in the Colorado mountains, where the air was thin and the standards were even thinner when it came to proving yourself as a precision marksman. The base had earned its reputation as one of the most demanding sniper training facilities in the military, a place where careers were made or broken based on your ability to put a bullet exactly where it needed to go under impossible conditions. Sergeant Isabella "Izzy" Castillo stepped out of the transport vehicle, her combat boots making a soft thud against the asphalt as she surveyed the intimidating landscape before her. At 26, she possessed an unusual combination of feminine grace and military precision that seemed to confuse everyone she encountered. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, secured with what appeared to be a small pink elastic band that caught the morning light. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, but it was the subtle touches that made her stand out. The faint shimmer of clear nail polish on perfectly manicured nails, the barely visible hint of mascara that accentuated her dark eyes, and the way she carried herself with a confidence that seemed at odds with the delicate features of her face. The precision marksmanship training facility loomed ahead, a collection of utilitarian buildings surrounded by observation towers, shooting ranges, and the kind of equipment that separated amateur shooters from the military's elite snipers. This wasn't a place for weekend warriors or casual marksmen. This was where the military sent soldiers who needed to be able to eliminate targets at distances that most people couldn't even see clearly, under conditions that would break the concentration of lesser shooters. As Izzy approached the main building, she passed a group of soldiers who were gathered around an equipment truck, checking their gear and engaging in the kind of pre-training banter that mixed nervous energy with practiced bravado. Their conversation died mid-sentence as she walked by, not because of her rank or reputation, but because of the cognitive dissonance her appearance created in their minds. "Did you see that?" one of them muttered, not bothering to lower his voice significantly. "Looks like someone's playing dress-up in Mommy's makeup kit." Another soldier, a stocky corporal with arms covered in tactical tattoos, shook his head in apparent disbelief. "I swear, the standards just keep dropping. Next thing you know, they'll be sending us recruits straight from beauty school." The comments weren't unusual for Izzy. Throughout her 8-year military career, she'd encountered the same reaction countless times. Her decision to maintain her feminine appearance while serving in traditionally male-dominated roles had always been a source of confusion and often dismissal from her peers. While other female soldiers adopted a more androgynous presentation to fit in, Izzy had made a conscious choice to be authentically herself, regardless of how others interpreted her appearance. She pushed through the glass doors of the main facility, where the familiar scent of gun oil and cleaning solvents mixed with the sterile smell of military-grade air conditioning. The interior was exactly what she'd expected: functional, no nonsense, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Bulletin boards lined the walls, covered with shooting scores, safety protocols, and photographs of distinguished graduates who'd gone on to serve in elite units around the world. The reception area buzzed with activity as soldiers signed in for various training programs. Most were men, ranging in age from their early 20s to grizzled veterans in their 40s, all sharing the common thread of having been selected for advanced marksmanship training. They wore their experience like badges of honor, discussing previous assignments, comparing equipment preferences, and sizing up potential competition with the practiced eye of professional warriors. As Izzy approached the main building, she passed a group of soldiers who were gathered around an equipment truck, checking their gear and engaging in the kind of pre-training banter that mixed nervous energy with practiced bravado. Their conversation died mid-sentence as she walked by, not because of her rank or reputation, but because of the cognitive dissonance her appearance created in their minds. "Did you see that?" one of them muttered, not bothering to lower his voice significantly. "Looks like someone's playing dress-up in Mommy's makeup kit." Another soldier, a stocky corporal with arms covered in tactical tattoos, shook his head in apparent disbelief. "I swear, the standards just keep dropping. Next thing you know, they'll be sending us recruits straight from beauty school." The comments weren't unusual for Izzy. Throughout her 8-year military career, she'd encountered the same reaction countless times. Her decision to maintain her feminine appearance while serving in traditionally male-dominated roles had always been a source of confusion and often dismissal from her peers. While other female soldiers adopted a more androgynous presentation to fit in, Izzy had made a conscious choice to be authentically herself, regardless of how others interpreted her appearance. She pushed through the glass doors of the main facility, where the familiar scent of gun oil and cleaning solvents mixed with the sterile smell of military-grade air conditioning. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Functional, no nonsense, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Bulletin boards lined the walls, covered with shooting scores, safety protocols, and photographs of distinguished graduates who'd gone on to serve in elite units around the world. The reception area buzzed with activity as soldiers signed in for various training programs. Most were men, ranging in age from their early 20s to grizzled veterans in their 40s, all sharing the common thread of having been selected for advanced marksmanship training. They wore their experience like badges of honor, discussing previous assignments, comparing equipment preferences, and sizing up potential competition with the practiced eye of professional warriors. As Izzy approached the main sign-in desk, a young specialist was processing paperwork with mechanical efficiency. Her name tag read Jordan Lee, and she looked up with the kind of neutral professionalism that military personnel perfected after years of dealing with all types of soldiers. "Sergeant Castillo reporting for the Advanced Precision Marksmanship Assessment," Izzy replied, producing her orders and identification with crisp efficiency. Specialist Lee scanned the documents, her expression remaining neutral, though her eyes briefly took in Izzy's appearance with what might have been curiosity rather than judgment. "You're assigned to Group C, Sergeant. Assessment begins at 800 hours in the main briefing room. Equipment issue is at 7:30 hours if you need anything beyond your personal gear." "Thank you, Specialist," Izzy replied, accepting her paperwork and temporary base credentials. As she turned away from the desk, she became aware of the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Conversations hadn't stopped, but they definitely changed in tone and volume. She could feel eyes on her, assessing, categorizing, and almost certainly underestimating. It was a familiar sensation, one she'd learned to use to her advantage over the years. Near the equipment lockers, a group of soldiers was engaged in the kind of technical discussion that served as both information sharing and subtle competition. They compared scopes, discussed ammunition preferences, and shared stories about previous training experiences with the easy confidence of men who'd proven themselves in similar situations before. "The key to this course," one of them was saying, "is understanding that it's not just about marksmanship. They're testing your ability to adapt to changing conditions, make decisions under pressure, and maintain precision when everything else is trying to throw you off your game." His audience nodded appreciatively, clearly viewing him as someone worth listening to. This was Staff Sergeant Bryce Hamilton, though Izzy didn't know his name yet. What she could see was a man in his early 30s who carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from years of being the best shooter in most rooms he entered. His gear was top of the line. His uniform bore the subtle indicators of someone who'd served in demanding assignments, and his manner suggested he was accustomed to being both teacher and competitor in situations like this. "The key to this course," Hamilton continued, "is understanding that it's not just about marksmanship. They're testing your ability to adapt to changing conditions, make decisions under pressure, and maintain precision when everything else is trying to throw you off your game."
His audience nodded appreciatively, clearly viewing him as someone worth listening to. Standing beside him was Corporal Derek Sullivan, a lanky soldier with sharp features and the kind of eager attention that suggested he viewed Hamilton as both mentor and ally. Sullivan's gear was impressive, though not quite at Hamilton's level, and his body language indicated he was comfortable playing the role of second-in-command in their informal partnership. Exactly, Sullivan agreed. I've seen guys with perfect scores on the range completely fall apart when they get put in a realistic scenario. This course is designed to separate the real snipers from the paper punchers. Their discussion was drawing an audience of other soldiers who recognized expertise when they heard it. Hamilton clearly enjoyed the attention, his voice carrying with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to hold court on the subject of precision marksmanship. The record for this course, Hamilton announced, lowering his voice slightly to create an air of insider knowledge, is held by some Delta Force operator who came through here 3 years ago. I heard he completed the assessment in conditions that would have made most people pack up and go home. The group murmured appreciatively, though Izzy noticed that none of them seemed to know any specific details about this legendary performance. It was the kind of story that grew in the telling, becoming more impressive with each retelling until it achieved mythical status. Izzy found a quiet corner where she could observe the room while reviewing the training materials she'd been given. Her approach to preparation was methodical and thorough, but without the theatrical elements that characterize some of the other soldiers' routines. She didn't need to announce her competence to feel confident about it. As she read through the technical specifications of the assessment course, she became aware that the room's ambient conversation kept drifting back to speculation about the upcoming challenge. Soldiers compared their expected performance to past experiences, discussed strategies for dealing with various weather conditions, and generally engaged in the kind of pre-competition analysis that helped manage anxiety while building group cohesion. But underneath the professional discussion, there was another current of conversation that occasionally surfaced in fragments and glances. Comments about changing standards, questions about whether certain soldiers really belonged in advanced training programs, and the kind of coded language that military personnel used when they wanted to express opinions that couldn't be stated directly. Izzy had learned long ago to listen to these undercurrents without reacting to them. Her presence in spaces like this always generated a certain amount of commentary, and her experience had taught her that the best response was usually to let her performance speak for itself. Today would be no different, except that today, her performance would speak louder than anyone expected. The morning briefing was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, and soldiers were gradually migrating toward the designated assembly area. Izzy gathered her materials and joined the general movement, maintaining the same professional demeanor she'd displayed since arriving on base. What none of them knew, what couldn't be determined from her appearance, her gear, or her quiet preparation, was that Sergeant Isabella Castillo had been preparing for this moment not just since receiving her orders, but for her entire military career. Every assumption they'd made about her capabilities, every dismissive comment about her appearance, every doubt about whether she belonged in their elite community was about to be tested against a reality that would challenge everything they thought they knew about what made a superior marksman. The assessment course waiting for them had broken the confidence of dozens of experienced snipers, but Izzy approached it with the calm certainty of someone who understood that true precision came not from looking the part, but from being willing to do whatever it took to hit the target when it mattered most.
The main briefing room at Camp Thunder Ridge was designed with the kind of utilitarian efficiency that characterized most military facilities. Rows of metal folding chairs faced a large projection screen, while tactical charts and performance metrics lined the walls like silent testimonies to the facility's demanding standards. The room could accommodate 60 soldiers, though today's advanced precision marksmanship assessment had drawn only 18 candidates, a deliberately small group that represented the cream of their respective units. Staff Sergeant Bryce Hamilton claimed a seat in the third row, positioning himself where he could observe both the instructional area and his fellow candidates.
At 32, he possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from a decade of consistent superior performance in high-pressure situations. His service record included deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, where he'd served as a designated marksman with the 75th Ranger Regiment, before transitioning to a training role that allowed him to share his expertise with the next generation of military snipers. Hamilton's gear reflected his professional status and personal preferences. His rifle case bore the subtle scuff marks of extensive field use, while his shooting jacket displayed a collection of unit patches that told the story of his career progression. Everything about his equipment spoke of careful selection based on real-world experience, rather than catalog recommendations or online reviews. "Take a look around," Hamilton said quietly to Corporal Derek Sullivan, who'd taken the seat beside him. "Half these guys are going to wash out before lunch." Sullivan nodded, his sharp eyes scanning their competition with the analytical intensity of someone accustomed to assessing potential threats and allies. At 28, he'd built his reputation as Hamilton's most reliable training partner, a relationship that had evolved from initial mentor-student dynamics into something approaching genuine friendship. Sullivan's own background included specialized training with Marine Scout snipers, and his technical knowledge complemented Hamilton's tactical experience in ways that made them an effective team. "That guy from Fort Bragg looks solid," Sullivan indicated, a weathered sergeant in the front row whose posture and equipment suggested extensive combat experience. "And the staff sergeant from Benning has the kind of gear setup you don't see unless someone's serious about long-range precision." Hamilton followed Sullivan's gaze, mentally cataloging potential competition while maintaining the relaxed demeanor that had become his trademark in situations like this. He'd learned early in his career that excessive preparation anxiety was counterproductive, and that confidence, genuine confidence based on proven ability, was often the deciding factor when technical skills were relatively equal among competitors. "Gear doesn't shoot," Hamilton replied, with the kind of casual wisdom that came from years of seeing expensive equipment fail to compensate for fundamental skill deficiencies. "But you're right about the experience factor. Anyone who made it to this level has probably earned their spot." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of 3 more soldiers, including Sergeant Isabella Castillo, who entered the briefing room with the same quiet professionalism she'd displayed earlier. She selected a seat near the back, away from the informal clusters of conversation that had formed as soldiers introduced themselves and compared backgrounds. Sullivan's attention was immediately drawn to her appearance, his expression shifting from professional assessment to barely concealed amusement. "Are you seeing this?" he murmured to Hamilton, his voice low enough to avoid being overheard by anyone except his immediate companion. Hamilton turned to look, his eyes taking in Izzy's feminine presentation with the kind of quick evaluation that military personnel learn to perform instinctively. The pink hair tie, the subtle makeup, the overall appearance that seemed more appropriate for an office environment than a demanding military training course. All of it registered in his consciousness as evidence of someone who might not fully understand what she was getting herself into. "Equal opportunity in action," Hamilton replied, his tone carefully neutral, but carrying undertones that Sullivan would recognize as skeptical. "I'm sure she's very qualified on paper." The comment wasn't overtly dismissive, but it carried the weight of assumptions that both men shared without needing to state explicitly. In their experience, soldiers who prioritized appearance over pure functionality often struggled when faced with the harsh realities of advanced tactical training. The military had made significant efforts to integrate women into previously male-dominated roles, but the results had been mixed, particularly in physically and mentally demanding specialties like precision marksmanship. "Think she'll make it through the morning?" Sullivan asked, genuine curiosity mixing with the kind of casual speculation that helped pass time before stressful events. Hamilton considered the question seriously, his professional instincts warring with his personal biases. He said, "Depends on what her actual background is. Sometimes people surprise you, but statistically speaking," he shrugged, leaving the implication hanging in the air between them. Their assessment wasn't malicious, but it reflected the kind of unconscious prejudice that permeated military culture despite official policies promoting equality and inclusion.
Both men had worked with competent female soldiers in various capacities, but the sniper community remained overwhelmingly male, and exceptional female marksmen were rare enough to be noteworthy when they appeared. As more soldiers filtered into the briefing room, Hamilton found himself holding informal court with a growing audience of candidates who recognized his experience and sought his insights about the upcoming assessment. This was a familiar role for him, one he'd played at training facilities across the military where his reputation preceded him, and younger soldiers looked to him for guidance. The key thing to remember, Hamilton explained to the small group that had gathered around his chair, is that this isn't just about putting rounds on target. They're evaluating your decision-making process, your ability to adapt to changing conditions, and your performance under psychological pressure. A young corporal from the 101st Airborne nodded eagerly. "What kind of psychological pressure are we talking about, Staff Sergeant?" Hamilton smiled, the expression of someone who'd been asked that question many times before. Time constraints, environmental factors, equipment malfunctions, target uncertainty. Basically anything that can go wrong probably will go wrong. The assessors want to see how you respond when your perfect plan gets thrown out the window. Sullivan leaned forward, adding his own perspective to the discussion. "I've heard they use some pretty sophisticated simulation technology here. Targets that appear and disappear on irregular timing, wind conditions that change without warning, even audio distractions designed to break your concentration." The group absorbed this information with the serious attention of soldiers preparing for a significant challenge. Several of them glanced toward the front of the room where Master Sergeant Vincent Kane was setting up projection equipment for the formal briefing that would begin shortly. "Has anyone here worked with Kane before?" asked a staff sergeant from Fort Campbell, his question directed at the group, but clearly hoping Hamilton might have insider knowledge. Not directly, but his reputation speaks for itself. 23 years in the service, including time with special operations. He's trained some of the best snipers in the military, and he doesn't have patience for anything less than excellence. As if summoned by their discussion, Master Sergeant Kane approached the podium with the kind of measured pace that suggested absolute confidence in his authority and expertise. At 45, he possessed the weathered appearance of someone who'd spent decades in demanding military roles, and his bearing made it clear that he expected the same level of professionalism from everyone in the room. "Gentlemen," Kane began, then paused as his eyes swept the room and registered Izzy's presence. "And, lady, welcome to the Advanced Precision Marksmanship Assessment. Over the next 6 hours, you'll be evaluated on skills that separate competent soldiers from elite marksmen." Hamilton settled back in his chair, his attention focused on Kane's briefing, while part of his mind continued to process the dynamics of the room. He'd been through similar assessments before, and while each facility had its own particular challenges, the fundamental requirements remained consistent: exceptional shooting ability, mental toughness, and the kind of professional competence that couldn't be faked or approximated. Sullivan, meanwhile, found his attention drifting periodically toward the back of the room, where Sergeant Castillo sat with the same quiet focus she'd displayed since arriving on base. Something about her stillness struck him as unusual, not the nervous energy of someone out of their depth, but the calm attention of someone who understood exactly what they were facing. "Interesting," he murmured to Hamilton during a pause in Kane's presentation. "What's interesting?" Hamilton asked, following Sullivan's gaze toward Izzy. "She's not taking notes. Everyone else in here is writing down everything Kane says, but she's just listening, like she already knows what he's going to tell us." Hamilton looked more carefully, noting that Sullivan was correct. While the other candidates scribbled frantically in notebooks or tablets trying to capture every detail of Kane's briefing, Izzy simply sat with her hands folded, her attention focused entirely on the instructor's words. "Overconfidence," Hamilton concluded after a moment. "She probably thinks this is going to be easier than it actually is." But even as he said it, something about his explanation didn't feel quite right. Overconfident soldiers typically displayed their certainty through body language and verbal participation. Izzy's behavior seemed more like the focused attention of someone who understood they were receiving important information and wanted to absorb it completely, rather than just record it for later review. The briefing continued, with Kane outlining the specific requirements and evaluation criteria that would determine success or failure.
As the details accumulated, Hamilton felt his usual pre-competition excitement building. This was what he trained for, what he excelled at, and what had earned him recognition throughout his military career. In 4 hours, when the actual assessment began, he would demonstrate why Staff Sergeant Bryce Hamilton was considered one of the finest marksmen in his unit. What he couldn't predict was that in those same 4 hours, everything he thought he knew about superior shooting would be challenged by the quiet sergeant in the back row who seemed to understand something about precision that none of them had learned yet.
Master Sergeant Vincent Kane commanded the room with the effortless authority of someone who'd spent over 2 decades transforming ordinary soldiers into exceptional marksmen. His weathered hands moved across the control panel with practiced efficiency, bringing the large projection screen to life with a detailed schematic that immediately captured every soldier's attention. "What you're looking at," Kane announced, his voice carrying the kind of clarity that came from years of delivering crucial information to people whose lives might depend on understanding it correctly, "is the Adaptive Precision Challenge, a comprehensive assessment that will test every aspect of your capabilities as a military marksman." The schematic revealed a complex course layout that seemed designed by someone who understood exactly how to push elite soldiers beyond their comfort zones. Multiple shooting positions were scattered across varied terrain, connected by movement corridors that would require candidates to transition between different elevations, firing angles, and environmental conditions while maintaining the mental focus necessary for precision shooting. Hamilton leaned forward in his chair, his experienced eye immediately beginning to analyze the tactical challenges presented by the course design. He could see engagement zones that would require shots at distances ranging from 300 meters to over 800 meters, with targets positioned to test not just marksmanship skills, but decision-making abilities under time pressure. The assessment consists of 12 distinct shooting problems, Kane continued, using a laser pointer to highlight specific areas of the course. Each problem presents unique challenges, variable wind conditions, time constraints, target identification requirements, and environmental factors designed to simulate real-world operational conditions. Sullivan nudged Hamilton quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Looks like they've upgraded since the last time either of us was here. That elevation change in Sector 4 is going to be brutal." Hamilton nodded, noting the steep terrain transition that would require candidates to adjust not just for distance and wind, but for significant angle compensation that could throw off even experienced shooters. The course designers had clearly put considerable thought into creating scenarios that would separate truly elite marksmen from those who simply performed well in controlled range conditions. "Your time limit," Kane announced, his words cutting through the quiet conversations that had begun among the candidates, "is 4 hours from the moment you begin the first shooting problem to the completion of the final engagement. This includes all movement between positions, equipment adjustments, and target prosecution." A ripple of concern passed through the room. 4 hours sounded generous until you considered the complexity of the challenges involved. Calculating firing solutions for 12 different problems, moving between widely separated positions, and maintaining the mental focus necessary for precision shooting under time pressure would push even the most experienced soldiers to their limits. "Scoring is based on accuracy, time efficiency, and tactical decision-making," Kane continued. "Each target engagement is scored individually, but your overall assessment depends on consistent performance across all 12 problems. One exceptional shot cannot compensate for multiple marginal performances." Hamilton found himself mentally reviewing his equipment loadout, considering which gear combinations would provide the best balance between precision and mobility. The course design clearly favored shooters who could adapt quickly to changing conditions rather than those who relied on perfect preparation for predictable scenarios. "Questions?" Kane asked, his eyes scanning the room with the expectation that professional soldiers would seek clarification on any points that might affect their performance. A staff sergeant from the 82nd Airborne raised his hand. "Master Sergeant, what are the weather conditions expected to be during the assessment period?" Kane smiled, the expression of someone who'd anticipated that particular question.
Current conditions will be whatever they are when you're shooting. Part of this assessment is your ability to read and adapt to environmental factors in real time. No weather briefings, no wind speed reports, no advance notice of changing conditions. The implication was clear. This wasn't going to be a controlled range exercise where candidates could dial in their equipment based on predictable conditions. They would need to demonstrate the kind of field adaptability that separated competent range shooters from combat-effective marksmen. As King continued his briefing, covering safety protocols and logistical details, informal conversations began developing among the seated soldiers. Hamilton found himself at the center of one such discussion, his experience and reputation making him a natural focal point for candidates seeking insight into the challenges ahead. 4 hours sounds reasonable, offered a young sergeant from Fort Benning, until you factor in the movement requirements and environmental variables. Hamilton nodded thoughtfully. The key is pacing yourself correctly. Rush the early problems and you'll be mentally exhausted by the time you reach the difficult long-range engagements. Take too much time with perfect preparation and you'll run out of daylight for the final shots. Sullivan added his own perspective, drawing on his experience with similar challenging courses. Equipment selection is going to be crucial. You want equipment that's versatile enough to handle multiple scenarios without being so heavy that it slows down your transitions.
Their discussion attracted the attention of several other candidates, creating an impromptu strategy session that reflected the collaborative spirit that often developed among professional soldiers facing shared challenges. Everyone understood that while they were competing against each other, they were also part of a military community that valued collective competence over individual ego. "Anyone want to make predictions about who's going to set the standard?" asked a corporal from the 101st, his question carrying the kind of competitive edge that made these assessments more engaging for participants. Hamilton grinned, recognizing an opportunity to build confidence while acknowledging the quality of his competition. "Based on what I can see in this room, I'd say any of the top 5 or 6 shooters have a legitimate chance at posting an exceptional score. The course design looks challenging enough that small mistakes will be magnified, so consistency is going to matter more than individual brilliant shots." As their conversation continued, Hamilton became aware that informal betting pools were beginning to develop among the candidates. Soldiers quietly compared backgrounds, assessed equipment setups, and made the kind of friendly wagers that added extra motivation to already significant professional challenges. $20, says the staff sergeant from Bragg posts the highest score, offered one soldier, his assessment based on the weathered appearance and high-quality gear that marked experienced combat veterans. "I'll take that bet," replied another, "but I'm putting my money on Hamilton here. His reputation speaks for itself." Hamilton acknowledged the confidence with appropriate humility, while privately feeling the familiar surge of competitive energy that these situations always generated. He'd built his career on performing well under pressure, and the combination of professional assessment and peer recognition created exactly the kind of environment where he typically excelled. Meanwhile, at the back of the room, Sergeant Isabella Castillo continued her quiet observation of the proceedings. She'd listened to Kane's briefing with focused attention, but unlike many of her fellow candidates, she hadn't felt compelled to engage in strategic discussions or equipment second-guessing. Her preparation approach seemed to center on understanding the requirements thoroughly rather than analyzing every possible variable that might affect performance. Sullivan noticed her continued silence and mentioned that to Hamilton during a pause in their group discussion. "The sergeant in the back still hasn't said a word. Either she's extremely confident or she has no idea what she's gotten herself into." Hamilton glanced toward Izzy, noting that her posture and expression suggested focused concentration rather than anxiety or uncertainty. "Hard to tell," he admitted. "Some people process pressure differently. We'll find out soon enough what her actual capabilities are." What neither Hamilton nor Sullivan could have anticipated was that Sergeant Castillo's quiet confidence wasn't based on hope or determination, but on knowledge. While they speculated about course challenges and optimal strategies, she was mentally reviewing techniques and principles that had been developed through years of experience in exactly the kind of high-pressure precision shooting that the Adaptive Precision Challenge was designed to test. As Kane concluded his briefing and dismissed the candidates to begin their equipment preparation,
The room buzzed with the kind of focused energy that preceded significant professional challenges. 18 elite soldiers prepared to demonstrate their capabilities against a course designed to reveal the difference between good marksmen and exceptional ones. The betting pools had crystallized around three primary contenders: Hamilton, based on his reputation and obvious expertise; the staff sergeant from Bragg, whose combat experience was evident in his gear and bearing; and a quiet master sergeant from Special Forces, whose minimal participation in discussions suggested either supreme confidence or deep knowledge of what lay ahead. No one had placed any bets on Sergeant Isabella Castillo. Her name hadn't even been mentioned in the speculative conversations about potential standout performances. As far as the other candidates were concerned, she represented a statistical anomaly rather than legitimate competition. In less than 3 hours, that assessment would prove to be the most significant miscalculation any of them had ever made in their military careers.
The equipment preparation area at Camp Thunder Ridge resembled a high-end gun store crossed with a military armory, where precision instruments worth tens of thousands of dollars were treated with the kind of reverence typically reserved for religious artifacts. 18 candidates methodically checked their gear, each following personal rituals developed through years of experience in situations where equipment failure could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Staff Sergeant Hamilton moved through his preparation routine with the kind of practiced efficiency that marked truly experienced soldiers. His rifle case opened to reveal a customized M24 sniper weapon system that bore the subtle modifications of someone who understood exactly how each component contributed to overall performance. The scope had been precisely zeroed for his shooting style, the trigger had been adjusted to his exact preferences, and every accessory had been selected based on real-world experience rather than catalog recommendations. "Beautiful setup," commented Sergeant Marcus Webb from the 10th Mountain Division, whose own equipment reflected similar attention to detail and personal customization. "That scope configuration should handle anything they throw at us on this course." Hamilton nodded his appreciation while continuing his methodical inspection process. "The key is having gear you trust completely," he replied. "When you're under pressure, you don't want to be second-guessing your equipment. Everything needs to work exactly the way you expect it to work." Nearby, Corporal Sullivan was conducting his own preparation ritual, though his approach differed slightly from Hamilton's more systematic method. Sullivan favored a slightly lighter rifle configuration that sacrificed some long-range precision for improved mobility between shooting positions, a trade-off that reflected his background in more dynamic tactical environments. "First group goes out in 20 minutes, Sullivan observed, checking his watch against the schedule posted on the preparation area wall. "Should be interesting to see how the course plays in real conditions versus what we saw in the briefing." The first group consisted of 6 candidates, including Staff Sergeant Robert Chen from Fort Bragg, the weathered veteran who'd attracted attention during the betting discussions. Chen's reputation preceded him: 2 deployments as a designated marksman, instructor certification at multiple facilities, and the kind of quiet competence that experienced soldiers recognized immediately. As the first group gathered their gear and moved toward the starting line, the remaining candidates found vantage points where they could observe the initial attempts. This wasn't just curiosity, it was professional intelligence gathering. Watching other shooters tackle the course challenges would provide valuable insights into optimal strategies, potential problem areas, and the kinds of mistakes that could derail an otherwise solid performance. Master Sergeant Kane positioned himself at the central observation post, where electronic monitoring systems allowed him to track each candidate's progress through the 12 shooting problems. Multiple cameras and sensors provided real-time data on accuracy, timing, and tactical decision-making that would contribute to the final assessment scores. "Chen, you're first up," Kane announced through the communication system that connected all shooting positions. "Begin when ready." Through high-powered spotting scopes, the observing candidates watched Chen approach the first shooting problem with the methodical confidence that had earned him his reputation. The initial engagement appeared straightforward, a 400-meter shot at a standard military silhouette target under relatively calm wind conditions. Chen settled into his shooting position with textbook form, his movements economical and precise. The shot broke cleanly, and even from their distant observation point, the other candidates could see that his bullet had found its mark well within the scoring zone. "Solid start," Hamilton murmured to Sullivan, both men recognizing competent marksmanship when they saw it. "He's setting a good pace for the rest of the problems." But as Chen progressed through the course, the challenges escalated in ways that the briefing materials hadn't fully conveyed.
The second shooting problem introduced crosswind conditions that required rapid adjustment from his previous firing solution. The third problem presented multiple targets at varying distances, requiring quick transitions between different range estimations and holdover calculations. By the fourth shooting problem, Chen's progress had slowed noticeably. The observing candidates watched through their optics as he spent longer than optimal calculating his firing solution, the time pressure beginning to affect his normally smooth routine. "He's overthinking it," observed Sergeant Martinez from the 82nd Airborne. His comment reflected the kind of tactical analysis that experienced shooters performed instinctively. When you're second-guessing your initial calculations, you're usually making the problem worse, not better. The fifth shooting problem proved to be Chen's undoing. A long-range engagement at nearly 700 meters, complicated by shifting wind conditions, and a target that appeared smaller than the standard silhouettes he'd been engaging. His first shot missed low and left. His second shot, adjusted for the observed error, missed high and right. And by the time he'd fired his third shot, closer to the target but still outside the scoring zone, his confidence had visibly deteriorated.
Chen completed the remaining shooting problems with the mechanical determination of someone trying to salvage a performance that had already gone off the rails. His final score, when Kane announced it over the communication system, confirmed what the observers had already concluded: 58 points out of a possible 120, well below the 85-point threshold required for qualification. "Damn," Sullivan said quietly, the single word capturing the collective realization that the course was significantly more challenging than any of them had anticipated. Chen's failure wasn't due to lack of skill or preparation. It was the result of accumulated pressure and the kind of cascading errors that could destroy even experienced shooters' performance. The second candidate, Corporal Davies from the 1st Infantry Division, approached the course with visible determination to avoid Chen's mistakes. His strategy seemed to center on accepting slightly lower accuracy in favor of maintaining a consistent pace through all 12 problems. Davies' approach worked better initially. He completed the first 6 shooting problems with solid, if not exceptional, accuracy scores. But the 7th problem, a complex scenario involving multiple targets at different elevations, required the kind of rapid problem-solving that couldn't be accomplished through conservative tactics alone. The observing candidates watched Davies struggle with target prioritization, spending precious time trying to determine the optimal engagement sequence instead of trusting his initial tactical assessment. When he finally began shooting, his shots were technically competent but delivered too slowly to maintain the pace necessary for completing all 12 problems within the time limit. Davies ran out of time during the 11th shooting problem, leaving 2 engagements incomplete. His partial score of 63 points represented solid marksmanship, undermined by poor time management. A different type of failure than Chen's, but equally decisive. The third and fourth candidates from the first group followed similar patterns: initial competence giving way to accumulated pressure, small mistakes compounding into larger problems, and final scores that fell well short of the qualification threshold. Back in the observation area, the mood among the remaining candidates had shifted from confident anticipation to sober recognition that they were facing a more demanding challenge than any of them had experienced before. 4 attempts, 0 qualifications, Hamilton said, his voice carrying none of the casual confidence that had characterized his earlier comments. This course isn't just testing marksmanship. It's designed to break down your entire approach to precision shooting. Sullivan nodded grimly, his own assessment equally sobering. The time pressure alone is brutal, but combined with the environmental variables and target complexity, it's like they designed it to find every possible weakness in a shooter's game. Several candidates began second-guessing their equipment choices and preparation strategies. Conversations that had earlier focused on confident predictions now centered on identifying potential failure points and developing contingency plans for when initial strategies inevitably proved inadequate. "Maybe we should reconsider the betting pools," suggested one soldier, his attempt at humor falling flat in the changed atmosphere. Hamilton looked toward the back of the observation area, where Sergeant Castillo continued her quiet monitoring of the proceedings. Unlike the other candidates who were visibly affected by the string of failures they'd witnessed, she maintained the same focused calm that had characterized her behavior throughout the morning.
She's either completely delusional about what she's facing, or she knows something the rest of us don't, Hamilton said to Sullivan, following his gaze, noting that Izzy seemed to be studying not just the candidate's successes and failures, but the specific ways the course design created pressure and forced errors. Her attention appeared more analytical than anxious, as if she were gathering data rather than simply hoping for the best. "Either way," Sullivan replied, "we're about to find out. The second group starts in 30 minutes, and after what we just saw, everyone's going to be shooting with different expectations." What none of them realized was that Sergeant Isabella Castillo had been gathering more than just observational data. Every failed shot, every time management error, every moment of visible pressure had confirmed her understanding of exactly why this course was designed the way it was, and, more importantly, how it could be beaten by someone who understood that precision shooting was as much about mental discipline as technical skill. In 30 minutes, the second group would begin their attempts, and the pattern of failure that had characterized the morning would either continue or be dramatically interrupted by someone who approached the challenge from a completely different perspective.
The second group of candidates approached the starting line with a markedly different energy than their predecessors. Where the first group had displayed confident anticipation, these 6 soldiers carried the weight of witnessed failure, a psychological burden that experienced marksmen knew could be as dangerous as poor equipment or inadequate training. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres from the 173rd Airborne led this group, his reputation built on 3 combat deployments and a distinguished record as a sniper instructor. Torres had watched the first group's failures with the analytical eye of someone accustomed to learning from others' mistakes, and his approach to the course reflected that hard-earned wisdom. "Different strategy this time," Hamilton observed to Sullivan as they monitored Torres's preparation through their spotting scope. "He's moving faster between positions, trying to bank time early instead of pursuing perfect shots on every engagement." Torres's modified approach initially showed promise. He completed the first 4 shooting problems with acceptable accuracy while maintaining a pace that kept him well ahead of the time curve that had doomed previous candidates. His shots weren't textbook perfect, but they consistently found the scoring zones with the kind of practical precision that separated combat-effective shooters from range perfectionists. But the 5th shooting problem, the same long-range engagement that had broken Chen's confidence, presented challenges that couldn't be solved through tactical time management alone. The target sat at 680 meters, partially obscured by heat mirage and subject to crosswind conditions that seemed to shift unpredictably every few minutes. Torres spent merely 8 minutes calculating his firing solution, accounting for distance, wind, temperature, and the elevated shooting position that required careful angle compensation. His preparation was thorough and professional, reflecting the kind of methodical approach that had served him well throughout his military career. His first shot missed by 6 inches, close enough to demonstrate competent marksmanship, but far enough to confirm that his initial calculations had been inadequate. Torres adjusted his scope settings and fired again. The second shot struck closer to the target center, but still outside the scoring zone that would earn him points toward qualification. "He's fighting the wind," observed Sergeant Lisa Chang from the 25th Infantry Division, her comment reflecting the kind of technical analysis that experienced shooters performed instinctively, trying to calculate instead of reading the conditions in real time. Torres's third shot found the scoring zone, but the time he'd invested in achieving that success had consumed nearly 15 minutes of his 4-hour allocation. With 7 shooting problems remaining, his margin for error had effectively disappeared. The pattern continued through the remaining candidates in the second group. Sergeant Ramirez from Fort Carson managed to complete 8 of 12 shooting problems before running out of time. Corporal Johnson from the 1st Armored Division posted solid accuracy scores but struggled with the complex target identification scenarios that required split-second decisions about engagement priorities. By the time the second group completed their attempts, the scorecard told a discouraging story. 6 more attempts, 1 marginal qualification, Ramirez with 86 points, and a growing consensus that the adaptive precision challenge represented a fundamentally different level of difficulty than anything most of the candidates had previously encountered. "This is getting ridiculous," muttered Staff Sergeant Peters from the 4th Infantry Division.
his frustration echoing the sentiment that was building among the remaining candidates. I've been shooting competitively for 12 years, and I've never seen a course designed to generate this kind of failure rate. Hamilton found himself nodding in agreement, though his professional instincts warned against allowing frustration to undermine his mental preparation. The course was clearly demanding, but it was also fair in the sense that every candidate faced identical challenges under the same conditions. The question Hamilton said to the group of candidates that had gathered around him was whether we're dealing with unrealistic standards or whether we need to fundamentally rethink our approach to these kinds of challenges. Sullivan leaned forward, his expression reflecting the kind of tactical problem-solving that had made him an effective partner in Hamilton's training endeavors. Maybe the issue is that we're all approaching it like it's an extended version of familiar range exercises, when it's actually something completely different. Their discussion attracted several other candidates who were grappling with similar questions about strategy and expectations. The informal group that formed around Hamilton's expertise had grown to include nearly half of the remaining shooters, a testament to both his reputation and the collective need for leadership in the face of unexpected challenges. Here's what I think, Hamilton continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in professional military settings. This course is designed to test adaptive problem-solving under pressure. The candidates who are failing aren't lacking in technical skill. They're getting overwhelmed by the complexity and losing sight of fundamental principles. Master Sergeant Kane emerged from the control booth, his expression professionally neutral, but carrying undertones that suggested he was monitoring more than just individual performance scores. The pattern of failures had clearly attracted his attention, though whether that represented concern about course design or satisfaction with its effectiveness remained unclear.
Third group, Kane announced, his voice cutting through the various conversations that had developed among the waiting candidates. Equipment check-in in 15 minutes, course start in 30. Hamilton felt the familiar surge of competitive energy that preceded significant professional challenges. Despite the morning's discouraging results, he maintained confidence in his ability to succeed where others had failed. His equipment was superior, his experience more extensive, and his mental preparation more thorough than most of his competition. As the third group prepared for their attempts, Hamilton became increasingly aware of Sergeant Castillo's continued presence at the periphery of their activities. Throughout the morning's failures and increasingly frustrated discussions, she had maintained the same quiet observation that had characterized her behavior since arriving on base. "You know what bothers me about her?" Hamilton said to Sullivan, his voice low enough to avoid being overheard by other candidates, but carrying an edge that suggested growing irritation. "What's that?" Sullivan asked, though his tone suggested he shared similar feelings. "She's sitting there watching everyone fail, listening to all our analysis and strategy discussions, but she hasn't contributed a single insight or asked a single question," Hamilton replied. "Either she's completely out of her depth and doesn't even understand what she's seeing, or she thinks she already has all the answers." Sullivan glanced toward Izzy, noting that her posture and expression remained unchanged despite the mounting evidence that the course represented a formidable challenge for even the most experienced military marksman. "Maybe she's just processing differently than the rest of us." "What processing?" Hamilton's frustration was becoming more evident. "We've watched 10 experienced shooters struggle with this course, and she's acting like she's observing a training exercise instead of watching her competition reveal exactly how difficult this assessment actually is." The conversation was overheard by several other candidates who found themselves nodding in agreement with Hamilton's assessment. There was something unsettling about Izzy's apparent lack of concern in the face of mounting evidence that they were all facing an exceptionally demanding challenge. "Maybe she'll have a different perspective after she attempts the course herself," suggested Sergeant Williams from the 101st Airborne, his comment carrying diplomatic neutrality but underlying skepticism about Izzy's chances for success. Hamilton's expression suggested that he was looking forward to exactly that outcome. Throughout his military career, he'd encountered soldiers who projected confidence that wasn't supported by actual capability, and the course results would provide definitive resolution to any questions about relative competence levels.
The third group includes Rodriguez from Special Forces and Thompson from the Rangers, Sullivan observed, checking the posted schedule. If anyone's going to crack this course, it'll probably be one of them. Hamilton nodded, recognizing that both soldiers possess the kind of elite background and proven capabilities that might enable success where others had failed. But he also understood that his own turn was approaching, and with it, the opportunity to demonstrate that Staff Sergeant Bryce Hamilton belonged in the same category as the military's most elite marksmen. What he couldn't anticipate was that in less than 2 hours, his assumptions about relative competence levels would be challenged in ways that would force him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about precision shooting and about the quiet sergeant who seemed to understand something about the course that none of them had figured out yet. As the third group moved toward the starting line, the tension among the remaining candidates had reached a level where professional assessment began blending with personal ego. The morning's pattern of failures had created an atmosphere where success would represent not just qualification achievement, but validation of superior capability in the face of a challenge that was proving too difficult for most highly trained military marksmen. For Hamilton, the stakes had become personal in ways that extended beyond simple professional assessment. His reputation, his self-image, and his understanding of his own place in the military marksmanship community would all be tested against a course that seemed designed to humble even the most confident soldiers.
The third group's performance followed the now familiar pattern of initial competence deteriorating under the accumulated pressure of the adaptive precision challenge. Master Sergeant Rodriguez from Special Forces, widely considered the most likely candidate to break through the morning's pattern of failures, managed to complete 10 of 12 shooting problems before time constraints forced him to abandon his final 2 engagements. His score of 79 points represented the highest individual performance of the day, but still fell short of the 85-point qualification threshold. Staff Sergeant Hamilton watched Rodriguez's attempt with growing unease. If a Special Forces operator with Rodriguez's background and experience couldn't master the course, what did that say about the realistic expectations for the remaining candidates? The question gnawed at him as he mentally reviewed his own preparation and strategy, searching for advantages that might enable success where 13 previous attempts had failed. 79 points. Sullivan said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of recognition that even elite military marksmen were struggling against challenges that seemed designed to exploit every possible weakness in precision shooting technique. Rodriguez came closer than anyone, but close doesn't qualify. Hamilton nodded grimly, his confidence shaken but not broken by the mounting evidence that the course represented a fundamentally different level of difficulty than anything he'd previously encountered. His competitive instincts demanded that he find a way to succeed where others had failed, but his professional experience warned against the kind of overconfidence that had already destroyed several candidates' performances. As the third group completed their attempts and the facility prepared for the fourth and final group of candidates, Hamilton found himself studying the remaining competition with increased intensity. 6 soldiers remained, including himself, Sullivan, and Sergeant Castillo, whose continued presence felt increasingly incongruous given the morning's demonstration of just how demanding the assessment actually was. Final group, Master Sergeant Can announced, his voice carrying the same professional neutrality he'd maintained throughout the day, despite witnessing a failure rate that would have been shocking at most military training facilities. Equipment check begins now, course start in 20 minutes. Hamilton moved through his final preparation routine with mechanical precision, double-checking scope settings, ammunition selection, and equipment configuration, while part of his mind continued processing the tactical lessons learned from observing the previous 13 attempts. He'd identified several potential optimization strategies that might provide the marginal advantages necessary for success, but he also understood that the course seemed designed to punish any approach that relied too heavily on predetermined solutions. As he completed his equipment inspection, Hamilton became aware of Sergeant Castillo conducting her own preparation nearby. For the first time since arriving on base, he observed her routine closely, searching for insights into her background, experience level, and overall approach to precision shooting challenges. What he saw only intensified his growing frustration with her apparent lack of concern about the morning's results.
Her equipment check was thorough but unremarkable, her rifle setup standard military issue without the kind of customization that characterized serious competitive shooters, and her overall demeanor remained unchanged despite witnessing 13 consecutive failures by experienced military marksmen. Sergeant Castillo, Hamilton said, his voice carrying enough authority to capture the attention of the other candidates preparing nearby. I'm curious about your assessment of this morning's results. Izzy looked up from her equipment inspection, her expression professionally neutral but attentive. What would you like to know, Staff Sergeant? Well, Hamilton continued, his tone suggesting genuine interest while carrying undertones that experienced soldiers would recognize as potentially confrontational. We've watched 13 highly qualified marksmen struggle with this course. Most of them have more combat experience and competitive shooting background than typical candidates. Yet you seem remarkably unconcerned about facing the same challenges. The preparation area had grown quiet, with the remaining candidates and several facility staff members recognizing that they were witnessing more than casual pre-competition conversation. Hamilton's question carried implications about competence, preparation, and realistic self-assessment that touched on fundamental issues of military professionalism. I've been observing carefully, Izzy replied calmly. The course appears to test adaptive problem-solving under time pressure. Most of the failures seem to result from candidates trying to apply familiar techniques to unfamiliar scenarios instead of adjusting their approach to match the specific requirements. Hamilton felt his irritation spike at what he interpreted as armchair quarterbacking from someone who hadn't yet demonstrated any actual capability. That's an interesting analysis from someone who hasn't attempted the course yet. Do you have specific insights about what these experienced marksmen should have done differently? Sullivan stepped closer, recognizing the escalating tension and understanding that Hamilton was approaching a line that could damage his professional reputation if crossed inappropriately. But he also shared his frustration with what appeared to be unwarranted confidence from someone whose qualifications remained unclear.
I think, Izzy said carefully, that precision shooting under pressure requires mental discipline as much as technical skill. When shooters become focused on perfect execution instead of effective solutions, they often create problems that didn't exist initially. Mental discipline, Hamilton repeated, his voice carrying skepticism that was becoming more obvious to everyone within hearing range. That's your expert assessment of why Special Forces operators and Ranger instructors are failing to qualify on this course? The confrontation had moved beyond professional discussion into territory that other candidates recognized as potentially career-damaging for both participants. Military culture demanded respect for rank and experience, but it also valued competence and realistic self-assessment. Hamilton's challenge was walking a fine line between legitimate professional inquiry and inappropriate personal attack. I'm not making assessments about individual capabilities, Izzy replied, her voice remaining steady despite the obvious pressure Hamilton was applying. I'm observing that the course seems designed to reward adaptive thinking over mechanical execution. Adaptive thinking, Hamilton said, his frustration now clearly visible to everyone in the preparation area. Let me ask you directly, Sergeant. What's your background in precision marksmanship? What qualifications do you have that give you insight into challenges that are defeating some of the most experienced military shooters in the country? The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Every person in the preparation area understood that Hamilton had crossed into territory that demanded either substantive response or public acknowledgement of inadequate qualifications. Izzy's answer would either validate her apparent confidence or expose it as unfounded presumption. My qualifications will be demonstrated on the course, Izzy said simply, just like everyone else's. Hamilton stared at her for a long moment, recognizing that she'd deflected his challenge without providing the kind of specific background information that would justify her calm confidence in the face of mounting evidence about the course's difficulty. Fair enough, he said finally, his tone suggesting that he viewed her response as evasion rather than appropriate professional boundaries. But I hope you understand that this isn't a basic marksmanship test. This is an assessment designed to identify elite capabilities under realistic operational conditions. 13 experienced soldiers have attempted it today, and only one has come close to qualifying. I understand, Izzy replied, her voice carrying the same professional calm she'd maintained throughout the exchange. Hamilton nodded curtly, recognizing that he'd pushed the confrontation as far as professional propriety would allow. But his challenge had been witnessed by everyone in the preparation area, creating expectations and pressure that would follow both of them onto the course. Final group to the starting line, Kane announced, his timing suggesting that he had observed the exchange and chosen to intervene before it escalated. As the 6 remaining candidates gathered their equipment and moved toward the course entrance, Sullivan approached Hamilton with concern, evident in his expression. "You sure that was wise? If she actually performs well, that whole conversation is going to look pretty bad in retrospect." Hamilton shouldered his rifle and checked his equipment one final time. "Derek, I've been doing this for 12 years. I know what competent marksmanship looks like, and I know what overconfidence looks like. We're about to find out which one she's been displaying." What Hamilton couldn't predict was that in less than 2 hours, his confrontation with Sergeant Castillo would be remembered not as the moment he exposed unwarranted confidence, but as the moment he revealed his own fundamental misunderstanding of what true precision shooting expertise actually looked like. The course waited ahead, mechanical and impartial, ready to provide definitive answers to questions that could never be resolved through discussion or debate. For Hamilton, it represented the opportunity to validate his challenge and demonstrate superior capability. For Izzy, it represented something entirely different, the chance to show that sometimes the quietest voice in the room belongs to the person who understands the subject better than anyone else present. Staff Sergeant Bryce Hamilton approached the starting line of the Adaptive Precision Challenge with the kind of controlled confidence that had carried him through a decade of demanding military assignments. His equipment was perfectly configured, his mental preparation thorough, and his strategy refined through careful observation of 13 previous attempts. If anyone possessed the combination of skill, experience, and tactical insight necessary to master this course, Hamilton believed it was him. "Hamilton, your first step in the final group," Master Sergeant Kane announced through the communication system. "Begin when ready." Hamilton settled into his initial shooting position with practiced efficiency, his movements economical and precise. The first shooting problem appeared straightforward, a 350-meter engagement against a standard military silhouette under relatively calm conditions. This was exactly the kind of challenge where his superior equipment and extensive training should provide clear advantages over less experienced shooters. Through the observation scopes, the remaining candidates watched Hamilton's preparation with professional interest mixed with personal investment in his success. After witnessing 13 consecutive failures, everyone understood that Hamilton's attempt represented more than individual assessment. It was a test of whether elite military marksmanship training could overcome whatever factors had defeated every previous candidate. Sullivan monitored his friend's progress with particular intensity, recognizing the subtle indicators of confidence and control that characterized Hamilton's best performances. "Perfect form on the approach," he murmured to the other observers. "He's reading the conditions correctly and taking his time with the firing solution." Hamilton's first shot broke cleanly, the rifle recoiling against his shoulder with familiar precision. Through his scope, he could see the bullet impact within the target's scoring zone, not perfect center, but well within acceptable parameters for the course's standards. His confidence received immediate validation as he transitioned to the second shooting problem ahead of his planned timeline. The second engagement presented increased complexity, a 450-meter shot with noticeable crosswind conditions that required careful compensation in his point of aim. Hamilton had encountered similar challenges countless times throughout his career, and his approach reflected both technical competence and tactical experience. He spent nearly 3 minutes analyzing wind indicators, checking his ballistics calculations, and establishing a stable shooting position that would minimize external influences on his bullet's trajectory. His preparation was thorough without being excessive, demonstrating the kind of balanced approach that separated experienced marksmen from both novices and perfectionists. His second shot found the target with authority, striking within 2 inches of center mass. The observers could see Hamilton's satisfaction in his body language as he quickly transitioned to the third shooting problem, maintaining the aggressive pace that had become his signature approach to timed assessments. "He's making it look manageable," observed Sergeant Martinez, his comment reflecting the collective hope that Hamilton might finally break through the morning's pattern of failure. "First shooter today who seems to have the timing figured out." The third and fourth shooting problems continued Hamilton's string of successes. His shots weren't perfect, but they consistently found the scoring zones with the kind of practical accuracy that demonstrated both competence and confidence. More importantly, his time management appeared superior to previous candidates, suggesting that he'd learned from their mistakes and developed a more effective approach to the course's demands. But the fifth shooting problem, the same 680-meter engagement that had broken multiple previous candidates, presented challenges that couldn't be overcome through superior preparation alone. The target sat at maximum effective range for his rifle system, partially obscured by heat mirage and subject to crosswind conditions that seemed to shift unpredictably every few minutes. Hamilton approached a problem with methodical confidence, spending nearly 8 minutes calculating his firing solution and accounting for every variable he could identify. His preparation included range estimation, wind assessment, temperature compensation, and angle calculation, a comprehensive analysis that reflected his extensive training and experience. His first shot missed by 4 inches, close enough to demonstrate technical competence, but far enough to confirm that his initial calculations had been inadequate. Hamilton quickly adjusted his scope settings and fired again, his second shot striking closer to the target center, but still outside the scoring zone. Through the observation scopes, the watching candidates could see Hamilton's frustration beginning to affect his normally smooth routine. He spent additional time recalculating his firing solution, double-checking his equipment settings, and attempting to identify the source of his accuracy problems. "He's overthinking it now," Sullivan said quietly, recognizing the signs of mounting pressure that had affected his friend's performance in previous challenging situations. When you start second-guessing your initial assessment, you're usually making the problem worse. Hamilton's third shot found the scoring zone, but the time investment required to achieve that success had consumed nearly 20 minutes of his 4-hour allocation. With 7 shooting problems remaining, his margin for error had effectively disappeared, and the psychological pressure of time constraints began affecting his decision-making process.
The sixth shooting problem presented a different type of challenge. Multiple targets at varying distances that required rapid transitions between different firing solutions. Hamilton's approach became noticeably more aggressive as he attempted to make up lost time, but his accelerated pace introduced new sources of error that hadn't affected his earlier, more methodical engagements. His first shot at the primary target missed completely, a rare occurrence that shook his confidence and forced him to recalculate his firing solution under increased time pressure. His second shot found the target, but his transition to the secondary engagement was rushed and resulted in another miss that cost additional time and ammunition. By the seventh shooting problem, Hamilton's performance had begun the familiar deterioration that had characterized most previous attempts. His technical skills remained intact, but the accumulated pressure of time constraints, previous mistakes, and awareness that he was following the same failure pattern as 13 other experienced marksmen created a cascade of problems that no amount of equipment or training could overcome. "Come on, Bryce," Sullivan whispered, though his friend was too far away to hear encouragement and too focused on his immediate challenges to benefit from external support. Hamilton completed the 8th shooting problem with marginal accuracy, the 9th with visible frustration, and approached the 10th engagement knowing that he was running out of both time and opportunities to salvage a qualifying performance. His shooting remained technically competent, but the confidence and tactical decisiveness that had characterized his early problems had been replaced by the mechanical determination of someone trying to avoid complete failure. The 11th shooting problem, a complex scenario involving target identification under time pressure, proved to be Hamilton's breaking point. He spent precious minutes trying to determine engagement priorities, fired hastily when time pressure became overwhelming, and missed his primary target completely while achieving marginal accuracy on secondary engagements. When Master Sergeant Kane's voice announced time remaining 10 minutes, Hamilton faced the 12th and final shooting problem knowing that mathematical salvation was impossible. Even perfect execution of the remaining engagement wouldn't generate enough points to achieve the 85-point qualification threshold. Hamilton completed his final shot with professional composure, but his body language reflected the deflation of someone whose confidence had been systematically demolished by challenges that had proven more demanding than anticipated. He cleared his weapon, gathered his equipment, and walked back toward the starting line with the mechanical movements of someone processing unexpected failure. Final score, Hamilton, 73 points, Kane announced over the communication system. Not qualified. The silence that followed was profound. Hamilton had represented the best hope for breaking through the morning's pattern of failure, and his defeat seemed to confirm that the adaptive precision challenge was simply beyond the capabilities of conventional military marksmanship training, regardless of experience level or equipment quality. "Come on, Bryce," Sullivan whispered, though his friend was too far away to hear encouragement and too focused on his immediate challenges to benefit from external support. Hamilton completed his final shot with professional composure, but his body language reflected the deflation of someone whose confidence had been systematically demolished by challenges that had proven more demanding than anticipated. "I don't understand," said Hamilton, his expression reflecting confusion more than disappointment. "Everything I did was technically correct. My equipment was perfect, my preparation was thorough, and my shooting was within acceptable parameters. But somehow it wasn't enough." His bewilderment was shared by most of the observers who had watched competent marksmanship fail to translate into qualifying performance despite appearing to meet all the technical requirements for success. The course seemed to designed to exploit weaknesses that traditional military training didn't address, creating failure through accumulated pressure rather than individual incompetence. As Hamilton joined the growing group of unsuccessful candidates, attention turned to the 5 remaining soldiers who would complete the final group. His failure had effectively eliminated the last realistic hope for conventional success, leaving everyone to wonder whether the course was simply too demanding for human capabilities, or whether someone with a completely different approach might find a way to succeed where traditional excellence had proven inadequate. The answer to that question would come from the most unlikely source: the quiet sergeant who had maintained her confident calm throughout a morning of witnessed failure, and who was about to demonstrate that sometimes the most unconventional candidate possesses the most extraordinary capabilities.
4 more candidates attempted the adaptive precision challenge after Hamilton's failure, each following variations of the same pattern that had characterized the entire morning. Initial competence giving way to accumulated pressure, small mistakes compounding into larger problems, and final scores that fell short of the qualification threshold. By the time Sergeant Isabella Castillo approached the starting line, 17 experienced military marksmen had been defeated by a course that seemed designed to humble even the most confident soldiers. "Final candidate," Master Sergeant Kane announced through the communication system, his voice carrying the same professional neutrality he'd maintained throughout a day that had witnessed an unprecedented failure rate. "Sergeant Castillo, begin when ready." The observation area had grown quiet in ways that extended beyond simple professional attention. After witnessing 17 consecutive failures, the assembled candidates, instructors, and facility staff understood they were about to observe either the completion of a perfect failure rate or something that would challenge everything they thought they understood about precision marksmanship under pressure.
Izzy approached the first shooting position with movements that immediately differentiated her from every previous candidate. Where others had displayed nervous energy, aggressive confidence, or visible tension, she moved with fluid economy that suggested complete comfort with both her equipment and the challenges ahead. Her rifle handling was precise without being theatrical, her positioning economical without appearing rushed. Hamilton watched through his spotting scope with skeptical attention, expecting to witness the rapid deterioration that had characterized every previous attempt. "Let's see how long that confidence lasts," he muttered to Sullivan, his comment reflecting both personal investment in vindication and genuine curiosity about how someone with her apparent background would handle challenges that had defeated Special Forces operators and Ranger instructors. The first shooting problem, a 350-meter engagement that had proven manageable for most candidates, presented no apparent challenges for Izzy. She settled into her firing position with unhurried precision, spent less than 90 seconds calculating her firing solution, and delivered a shot that struck within inches of target center. "Solid start," observed Sergeant Martinez, his comment carrying a neutral professional assessment rather than surprise. But everyone's looked competent on the first few problems. Izzy's transition to the second shooting position revealed the first hint that her approach differed fundamentally from previous candidates. Where others had moved with either excessive caution or aggressive urgency, she maintained a consistent pace that suggested complete confidence in her time management strategy. Her equipment handling remained smooth and economical, without the visible adjustments and second guessing that had characterized other attempts. The second shooting problem, 450 meters with crosswind conditions, had challenged several previous candidates, but Izzy's approach suggested she'd anticipated the difficulties rather than simply reacting to them. Her wind assessment appeared instantaneous, her firing solution calculated with mechanical precision, and her shot delivered with the kind of unhurried confidence that came from absolute certainty about the outcome. Her bullet struck the target with authority, dead center with the kind of precision that eliminated any questions about shot placement. The observers could see through their optics that her impact point was within millimeters of perfect center mass, a level of accuracy that most marksmen achieved only under ideal range conditions. "That's exceptional shooting," Sullivan admitted reluctantly, his professional assessment overriding personal loyalty to Hamilton's earlier skepticism. By the fourth shooting problem, Izzy had established a performance standard that none of the previous candidates had approached. Her shots weren't just finding the scoring zones, they were consistently achieving near-perfect accuracy while maintaining a pace that kept her well ahead of the time constraints that had doomed other attempts. More importantly, her demeanor remained unchanged from her initial approach. Where other candidates had shown visible signs of mounting pressure, equipment concerns, or tactical uncertainty, Izzy continued her methodical progression through the course challenges with the kind of calm focus that suggested she was executing a familiar routine rather than attempting an assessment that had defeated 17 experienced military marksmen. The fifth shooting problem, the 680-meter engagement that had broken Hamilton's confidence and challenged every previous candidate, represented the first real test of whether Izzy's performance could be sustained against the course's most demanding requirements. She approached the problem with the same unhurried precision that had characterized her entire performance, spending approximately 4 minutes on preparation, significantly less time than Hamilton or other candidates had invested, but appearing completely adequate for her needs. Her range estimation seemed instantaneous, her wind assessment conducted with mechanical efficiency, and her firing position established with textbook precision. Her first shot at the distant target struck with devastating accuracy, finding the scoring zone with room to spare, and demonstrating the kind of long-range precision that separated elite marksmen from competent range shooters. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, no visible relief at achieving a difficult shot. Just smooth transition to the next shooting problem, as if 680-meter precision shooting was a routine part of her daily activities.
"How is that possible?" Hamilton asked, his question directed at no one in particular but reflecting the collective bewilderment of everyone observing Izzy's performance.
The sixth shooting problem, multiple targets requiring rapid transitions, had challenged most previous candidates, but Izzy's approach suggested she'd been preparing for exactly this type of scenario throughout her career. Her target acquisition was instantaneous, her transitions between firing solutions seamless, and her accuracy maintained at levels that seemed to defy the time pressure that had forced errors from other shooters. Shot after shot found their marks with mechanical precision. Her rifle seemed to be connected to her intentions through some form of direct neural interface, responding to her commands with the kind of absolute reliability that most marksmen achieved only through years of dedicated practice with specific equipment configurations. By the eighth shooting problem, the observation area had fallen completely silent. Professional conversations had ceased, betting discussions had been forgotten, and even Master Sergeant Kane was leaning forward in the control booth with the kind of focused attention reserved for witnessing something unprecedented. Izzy's performance continued without deviation from her established standard. Complex target identification scenarios, challenging environmental conditions, equipment malfunctions that would have disrupted other candidates' routines, nothing seemed to affect her calm progression through challenges that had proven insurmountable for every previous attempt. The ninth shooting problem presented target engagement under simulated combat stress, including audio distractions and time pressure designed to break concentration. Izzy's response suggested she'd encountered similar challenges before. Her focus remained absolute, her shooting unaffected by external stimuli, and her accuracy maintained at levels that seemed to exist in a different category from conventional military marksmanship. "She's making it look effortless," observed Sergeant Chang, her comment reflecting the collective realization that they were witnessing something that transcended normal human performance under pressure. The 10th and 11th shooting problems confirmed what everyone had begun to suspect. Sergeant Isabella Castillo wasn't just succeeding where others had failed, she was demonstrating capabilities that redefined what was possible within the parameters of the adaptive precision challenge. As she approached the 12th and final shooting problem, Izzy had completed 11 consecutive engagements with perfect or near-perfect accuracy while maintaining a pace that left her with comfortable time margins for the concluding challenge. Her equipment remained perfectly configured, her demeanor unchanged from her initial approach, and her performance suggesting that the course's demands were well within her normal operating parameters. The final engagement, a complex scenario combining long-range precision, environmental challenges, and target identification under pressure, had represented the breaking point for most previous candidates. For Izzy, it appeared to be simply the conclusion of a routine training exercise. Her final shot struck the target with the same devastating precision that had characterized her entire performance. Perfect center mass, textbook technique, and completion with time to spare that suggested she could have achieved identical results under even more demanding conditions. "Course complete," Master Sergeant Kane announced, his voice carrying undertones of amazement that professional military bearing couldn't entirely conceal. Time: 2 hours, 43 minutes. Score: 120 out of 120 possible points. Perfect qualification. The silence that followed was profound, not the uncomfortable quiet of witnessed failure, but the absolute stillness that accompanies witnessing something that challenges fundamental assumptions about human capability. 17 experienced military marksmen had been defeated by challenges that Sergeant Isabella Castillo had just completed with flawless execution, leaving everyone to wonder who she really was and how she'd acquired capabilities that seemed to exist in a completely different category from conventional military training. The questions that followed Izzy's perfect performance hung in the air like smoke from discharged ammunition. How had someone with no apparent reputation in the military marksmanship community just delivered a flawless demonstration that made 17 experienced snipers look like novices? The assembled candidates and facility staff found themselves confronting the uncomfortable reality that their assumptions about expertise, qualifications, and capability had been fundamentally wrong.
Master Sergeant Kane emerged from the control booth with an expression that mixed professional admiration with personal curiosity. In 23 years of military service, including extensive experience training elite marksmen, he'd never witnessed a performance that combined technical perfection with such apparent effortlessness. Izzy's achievement wasn't just statistically exceptional, it suggested capabilities that existed in a different category from conventional military training. "Sergeant Castillo," Kane said as he approached her at the equipment area, "that was the most impressive demonstration of precision marksmanship I've seen in my career. I'd like to understand your background and training history." The request was professional, but carried undertones of institutional curiosity. Perfect scores on demanding assessments typically came with documented histories of specialized training, competitive achievements, or operational experience that explained exceptional capability. Izzy's personnel file, however, contained standard military occupational specialty information, without the kind of specialized annotations that usually accompanied elite marksmen. Hamilton stepped closer, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine bewilderment about what he'd just witnessed. His confrontation with Izzy before the assessment now seemed embarrassingly misguided, but his professional instincts demanded understanding of how someone could possess capabilities that had been invisible until demonstrated under pressure. "I think we'd all benefit from that explanation," Hamilton said, his voice carrying respectful acknowledgement of superior performance while maintaining his need for comprehension. "What you just accomplished shouldn't be possible without extensive specialized training that would be reflected in your service record." Izzy looked around the assembled group. 17 failed candidates, multiple facility staff members, and Meister Sergeant Kane, all waiting for explanations that would resolve the cognitive dissonance between her apparent background and demonstrated capabilities. "My father was Miguel Castillo," she said simply, the name hitting the group like a physical impact. The recognition was immediate among anyone with serious knowledge of military marksmanship history. Miguel Castillo was legendary in sniper communities. Marine Corps Scout Sniper, later Army Special Forces, holder of multiple long-range shooting records, and widely considered one of the finest precision marksmen in modern military history. His techniques had been studied, his methods had been incorporated into training programs, and his achievements had become benchmarks for evaluating elite marksmanship capability. "Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Castillo?" Kane asked, his voice carrying the reverence that military professionals reserved for true legends in their field. "Yes," Izzy replied. "He began training me when I was 12 years old. By the time I enlisted, I'd already mastered techniques that most military marksmen never encounter during their entire careers." The revelation recontextualized everything the observers had witnessed. Izzy's perfect performance wasn't the result of exceptional natural talent or lucky circumstances. It was the product of 14 years of intensive training under one of the military's most accomplished precision shooting instructors, beginning during childhood when neural pathways were most adaptable to complex motor skill development. Sullivan shook his head in amazement, finally understanding the source of capabilities that had seemed inexplicable moments earlier. "You've been training for precision shooting since you were a kid. That's why the course looked easy for you. You've probably been practicing these exact techniques longer than most of us have been in the military." "Not these exact techniques, but the principles underlying them. My father believed that precision shooting was 90% mental discipline and 10% technical execution. He taught me to approach every shot as a problem-solving exercise rather than a mechanical process." Hamilton felt his earlier assumptions crumbling as he processed the implications of Izzy's background. His confrontation with her before the assessment had been based on the premise that her confidence was unwarranted, a judgment that now appeared embarrassingly wrong. She hadn't been displaying overconfidence. She had been demonstrating the quiet certainty that came from capabilities developed through years of training that exceeded anything available through conventional military channels. "Why didn't you mention your background earlier?" asked Sergeant Martinez, his question reflecting the collective curiosity about why someone with such exceptional qualifications had allowed others to underestimate her capabilities. "Because precision shooting speaks for itself,"
Izzy replied calmly. My father taught me that true competence doesn't require advanced advertising. It becomes evident when performance matters. The philosophy explained not just her perfect assessment performance, but her entire approach to the morning's proceedings. While other candidates had engaged in competitive discussions, equipment comparisons, and strategic speculation, Izzy had simply observed and prepared, confident that her actual capabilities would become evident when tested against measurable standards.
Kane found himself reassessing everything he thought he understood about identifying and developing elite marksmanship talent. Sergeant, your performance today represents capabilities that we typically associate with decades of specialized experience. If you learn these techniques during childhood and adolescence, that suggests training methodologies that might benefit our entire program. My father's approach was unconventional, Izzy acknowledged. He believed that most military marksmanship training focused too heavily on equipment and techniques, and not enough on developing the mental discipline necessary for consistent performance under pressure. He taught me to treat every shot as meditation in action, complete focus on the present moment without concern for external factors or previous results. The explanation provided context for what the observers had witnessed. Izzy's apparent immunity to the time pressure, environmental challenges, and psychological factors that had defeated every other candidate. She hadn't been fighting against the course's demands. She'd been applying training methodologies specifically designed to maintain peak performance under exactly those conditions. Hamilton approached her with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal embarrassment about his earlier behavior. Sergeant, I owe you an apology. My comments before the assessment were inappropriate and based on assumptions that were completely wrong. No apology necessary, Izzy replied. You were applying logical analysis based on available information. My background isn't typical, and there was no reason for you to assume capabilities that weren't documented in conventional ways. Her gracious response only intensified Hamilton's recognition of how badly he'd misjudged both her qualifications and her character. His confrontation had been motivated by frustration with what he'd interpreted as unwarranted confidence, but Izzy had actually been displaying the kind of quiet professionalism that came from absolute certainty about her own capabilities. Kane stepped forward, his expression reflecting the kind of institutional thinking that recognized exceptional talent when it was demonstrated conclusively. Sergeant Castillo, I'd like to discuss opportunities for you to share your training methodologies with our instructor staff. What you've demonstrated today suggests approaches to precision marksmanship that could benefit our entire program. I'd be honored to contribute, Izzy replied, her response reflecting the same professional demeanor she'd maintained throughout the morning's proceedings. As the group began dispersing, with candidates processing their own performance results and facility staff discussing the implications of Izzy's demonstration, Sullivan approached Hamilton with the kind of direct conversation that close friendships enabled. That was a hell of a learning experience, for all of us, but especially for you after that confrontation. Hamilton nodded grimly, recognizing that the morning's events had taught him lessons that extended far beyond precision marksmanship techniques. I made assumptions based on appearance and conventional expectations. Turns out the quiet person in the corner was the most qualified individual in the room, and I was too arrogant to recognize it. The realization carried implications that would affect Hamilton's approach to professional assessments for the rest of his military career. True expertise didn't always announce itself through conventional channels, and the most capable individuals sometimes chose to let their performance speak rather than their credentials. As Camp Thunder Ridge returned to its normal training schedule, word of Sergeant Isabella Castillo's perfect performance began spreading through military marksmanship communities with the kind of velocity that accompanied genuinely exceptional achievements. Her demonstration had established new benchmarks for what was possible under pressure, while simultaneously providing a masterclass in how quiet competence could triumph over loud confidence. The morning's events would be remembered not just for the perfect score that seemed impossible, but for the lesson that sometimes the most unlikely candidate possesses the most extraordinary capabilities, and that true excellence sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources. The transformation at Camp Thunder Ridge began immediately following Izzy's perfect performance, but its deeper implications would unfold over the weeks and months that followed. Word of her achievement spread through military marksmanship communities with the kind of velocity that accompanied genuinely historic performances. But the more significant changes occurred in the daily culture and training approaches at the facility itself. Master Sergeant Kane found himself fielding inquiries from training facilities across the country, all seeking information about the methods that had produced such exceptional results. His conversations with facility commanders, training coordinators, and military education specialists invariably focused on the same question: how could traditional military marksmanship programs incorporate the kind of mental discipline training that had enabled Sergeant Castillo's unprecedented performance? The key insight, Kane explained during a conference call with regional training coordinators, is that we've been approaching precision shooting as primarily a technical challenge when it's actually a mental discipline challenge supported by technical competence. Sergeant Castillo's demonstration suggests that our entire pedagogical approach may need fundamental revision. The implications extended beyond training methodology to encompass how military organizations identified, developed, and utilized exceptional talent. Izzy's background raised uncomfortable questions about how many other highly capable individuals might be overlooked because their qualifications didn't fit conventional patterns, or their capabilities weren't immediately obvious through standard assessment processes. Within the facility itself, the most profound changes occurred in how the 17 candidates who had witnessed Izzy's performance approached their own training and professional development. Hamilton's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic, but it reflected broader shifts in attitude and methodology that would influence the entire group's future military careers. "I've been thinking about what happened yesterday," Hamilton said to Sullivan, as they prepared for follow-up training sessions designed to help candidates learn from their assessment experiences. "I realized that my entire approach to competitive situations has been based on projecting confidence and establishing dominance, rather than focusing on actual performance improvement." Sullivan nodded, recognizing that his friend's self-reflection represented more than simple professional disappointment. "We all learn something about making assumptions based on limited information, but your willingness to acknowledge that and change your approach is what matters going forward." Hamilton's request to participate in additional training sessions with Izzy represented a significant shift from the competitive dynamics that had characterized his earlier behavior. Instead of viewing her superior performance as a threat to his professional identity, he began approaching it as an opportunity to learn from someone whose capabilities exceeded his own. "Sergeant Castillo," Hamilton said as he approached her at the equipment preparation area, "I was wondering if you'd be willing to share some insights about mental preparation techniques. I've realized that my entire approach to high-pressure situations has been counterproductive, and I'd like to understand how to develop the kind of focus you demonstrated during the assessment." Izzy's response reflected the same professional generosity that had characterized her behavior throughout the previous day's proceedings. "I'd be happy to help. My father always said that true expertise becomes more valuable when it's shared rather than hoarded." The training sessions that followed represented an unprecedented collaboration between someone whose capabilities had seemed impossible and experienced military marksmen who were willing to acknowledge that their understanding of precision shooting had been incomplete. Izzy's teaching approach reflected her father's philosophy, focusing on mental discipline and systematic problem-solving rather than material modifications or mechanical technique refinements. The key principle, Izzy explained to a group that included Hamilton, Sullivan, and several other candidates from the assessment, is treating each shot as a complete mental reset. You can't let previous results, whether successes or failures, influence your approach to the current engagement. Each shot exists in isolation, requiring complete focus on present conditions without emotional attachment to past performance. The concept seems simple in theory, but proved challenging to implement consistently under pressure. Hamilton discovered that his habitual approach to difficult shots involved carrying forward frustration from previous misses, creating a cascade of psychological pressure that undermined his technical competence.
I've been fighting against myself more than against the actual shooting challenges," he admitted during one of their practice sessions. "When I start missing targets, I get angry at the misses instead of simply focusing on solving the current problem." Izzy's guidance helped him develop techniques for maintaining emotional equilibrium regardless of immediate results, a skill that had applications extending far beyond precision marksmanship into leadership, decision-making, and professional development in general. The broader facility staff began incorporating elements of Izzy's training philosophy into their standard instruction programs, recognizing that traditional military marksmanship education had been incomplete in ways that affected not just individual performance, but overall program effectiveness.
"We've been teaching soldiers to shoot accurately," observed Sergeant First Class Williams, one of the facility's senior instructors. "But we haven't been teaching them to think clearly under pressure." Sergeant Castillo's approach addresses that gap in ways that could transform our entire training methodology. Kane formalized Izzy's role as a consulting instructor, creating opportunities for her to work with advanced candidates while developing curriculum materials that could be implemented at other facilities. Her contributions represented more than individual expertise. They provided systematic approaches to mental discipline training that had been missing from conventional military education programs. The changes weren't limited to training methodology. The culture of competitive ego and equipment-focused discussions that had previously characterized the facility's social dynamics gradually gave way to more collaborative approaches that emphasize collective improvement over individual dominance. "It's interesting how everything shifted after we saw what real excellence looked like," Sullivan observed during a break between training sessions. "Instead of trying to prove we're better than each other, we're all focused on actually becoming better at what we do." Hamilton's transformation became particularly evident in his interactions with newer candidates who arrived at the facility with attitudes similar to his previous approach. Instead of engaging in competitive posturing, he began sharing insights about the importance of mental discipline and the dangers of overconfidence based on limited experience. "The biggest lesson I learned," Hamilton explained to a group of newly arrived candidates, "is that true competence often looks different than what we expect. The most capable person in any group might be the one who talks the least but observes the most carefully." His guidance reflected hard-earned wisdom about the relationship between confidence and competence and the importance of remaining open to learning from unexpected sources. The advice carried particular weight because it came from someone who had experienced both the consequences of arrogance and the benefits of intellectual humility. Izzy's presence at the facility created ripple effects that extended throughout the military marksmanship community. Her perfect performance had established new benchmarks for what was possible under pressure, but her teaching contributions provided practical methodologies for helping others approach those standards through systematic mental discipline training. 6 months after her record-setting assessment performance, Sergeant Isabella Castillo had become one of the military's most sought-after marksmanship instructors, with requests for her expertise coming from elite units, training facilities, and educational institutions seeking to understand how mental discipline could enhance technical performance under pressure. But perhaps the most significant transformation occurred in the individuals who had witnessed her demonstration and learned to approach their own capabilities with greater humility, systematic thinking, and openness to improvement. Hamilton's evolution from competitive arrogance to collaborative professionalism represented the kind of personal growth that enhanced not just individual performance, but organizational effectiveness in ways that would influence military culture for years to come. The quiet sergeant who had been dismissed as too feminine had proven that true strength often came from unexpected sources, and that the most powerful transformations occurred when people were willing to acknowledge that their assumptions about competence and capability might be fundamentally wrong. 1 year after Sergeant Isabella Castillo's perfect performance at Camp Thunder Ridge, the reverberations of that historic day continued to reshape military marksmanship training across multiple branches of service. What had begun as a single assessment that challenged conventional assumptions about expertise and capability had evolved into a comprehensive transformation of how the military approached precision shooting education and talent development. The Castillo method,
as it had become known throughout training communities, represented more than innovative teaching techniques. It embodied a fundamental shift from equipment-focused, technically oriented instruction to holistic approaches that integrated mental discipline, systematic problem-solving, and adaptive thinking under pressure. Training facilities from Fort Benning to Quantico had implemented elements of her philosophy, resulting in measurably improved performance outcomes and significantly higher qualification rates. Master Sergeant Kane, now promoted to Sergeant Major and serving as the Army's senior marksmanship training coordinator, found himself at the center of institutional changes that extended far beyond his original facility. His office at the Pentagon regularly hosted delegations from allied military organizations seeking to understand how American precision shooting programs had achieved such dramatic improvements in candidate success rates. The fundamental insight, Kane explained during a briefing to senior military education officials, is that we were treating precision marksmanship as primarily a technical skill when it's actually a complex integration of mental discipline, tactical thinking, and mechanical execution. Sergeant Castillo's approach addresses all three components simultaneously, rather than treating them as separate training objectives. The statistical evidence supporting this approach was compelling. Training facilities implementing Castillo method principles reported qualification rate improvements ranging from 35% to 60%, with parallel reductions in training time requirements and equipment costs. More significantly, graduates from these programs demonstrated superior performance retention and adaptation capabilities when deployed to operational environments. Staff Sergeant Bryce Hamilton, now serving as a senior instructor at the facility where his transformation had begun, embodied the personal changes that accompanied broader institutional evolution. His approach to training new candidates reflected hard-earned wisdom about the relationship between confidence and competence, and the importance of maintaining intellectual humility regardless of experience level. The most dangerous thing any instructor can do, Hamilton explained to a group of newly assigned training staff, is assume that conventional indicators of competence tell the complete story about someone's capabilities. I learned that lesson the hard way, and it changed not just how I teach marksmanship, but how I approach leadership and professional development in general. His transformation had become legendary within military training communities, not just as an example of personal growth, but as demonstration of how even experienced professionals could benefit from challenging their fundamental assumptions about expertise and capability. Hamilton's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and learn from someone he had initially underestimated had enhanced rather than diminished his professional reputation. The story of his confrontation with Izzy, followed by his complete reversal of perspective and subsequent mentorship under her guidance, was frequently cited in leadership development programs as an example of how intellectual humility could transform professional relationships and organizational effectiveness. Sergeant Isabella Castillo herself had accepted promotion to staff sergeant and a specialized assignment developing advanced training curricula for multiple service branches. Her office at the Army's Maneuver Center of Excellence was filled with research materials, training videos, and correspondence from military organizations worldwide seeking to implement her methodologies. But perhaps more importantly, she had become a symbol of how true expertise could emerge from unexpected sources and triumph over conventional prejudices through demonstrated competence rather than aggressive self-promotion. Her story resonated particularly strongly with female service members who had encountered similar assumptions about their capabilities based on appearance or unconventional backgrounds. The key lesson, Izzy reflected during an interview for a military professional development publication, is that excellence doesn't always announce itself in ways that conform to our expectations. Sometimes the most capable person in the room is the one who chooses to let their performance speak rather than their credentials. The broader cultural impact of her story extended beyond military training communities into discussions about diversity, inclusion, and talent recognition in professional organizations. Business schools began using her case study to illustrate how unconscious bias could prevent organizations from recognizing and utilizing exceptional talent, while leadership development programs referenced her approach as an example of how quiet competence could be more effective than aggressive self-promotion. Corporal Derek Sullivan, now promoted to sergeant and serving as Hamilton's training partner, had developed his own insights about the importance of questioning assumptions and remaining open to learning from unexpected sources. His role in supporting Hamilton's transformation and subsequently learning from Izzy's methodologies had enhanced his own capabilities as both a marksman and an instructor.
What I learned that day, Sullivan explained to candidates preparing for advanced assessments, is that real confidence comes from competence, not from comparison to others. When you focus on continuously improving your own capabilities, rather than trying to establish dominance over other people, you create opportunities for growth that wouldn't exist otherwise. The facility at Camp Thunder Ridge had become a pilgrimage site for military marksmanship professionals seeking to understand how systematic approaches to mental discipline training could enhance technical performance under pressure. The course that had once broken the confidence of experienced marksmen was now being completed successfully by significantly higher percentages of candidates, thanks to training methodologies that addressed psychological preparation as thoroughly as technical skill development. Master Sergeant Kane's successor as facility commander, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, had implemented comprehensive changes that reflected lessons learned from Izzy's demonstration. The competitive culture of individual achievement had been replaced by collaborative approaches that emphasize collective improvement and mutual support among candidates. The most significant change, Martinez observed during a facility tour for visiting military educators, isn't in our equipment or our course design. It's in how we think about developing human potential under pressure. We've learned that the most effective training environments are those that challenge assumptions while providing systematic support for growth and improvement. The betting pools and competitive posturing that had once characterized candidate interactions had been replaced by study groups, peer mentorship programs, and collaborative problem-solving sessions that enhanced everyone's capabilities rather than simply identifying individual winners and losers. The legacy of that transformative day continued to influence military culture in ways that extended far beyond precision marksmanship training. Izzy's story had become part of military folklore, not just as an example of exceptional individual performance, but as demonstration of how organizations could benefit from remaining open to talent that didn't conform to conventional expectations. Annual ceremonies at Camp Thunder Ridge now included recognition of the Castillo Achievement, awarded to individuals who demonstrated exceptional capability while challenging assumptions about what expertise looked like. The award criteria specifically emphasized quiet competence, collaborative improvement, and willingness to share knowledge rather than hoard it for competitive advantage. Hamilton, now one of the military's most respected marksmanship instructors, often concluded his training programs by sharing the story of his encounter with Sergeant Castillo and the lessons it taught him about intellectual humility, professional growth, and the importance of recognizing excellence regardless of its source. That day changed more than my understanding of precision shooting, he would tell his students. It changed my understanding of what it means to be a professional, a leader, and a human being. The most valuable lesson anyone can learn is that there's always more to discover, and the most unlikely teacher might be the one who has the most important knowledge to share. The quiet sergeant who had been dismissed as too feminine had created a legacy that would influence military training, leadership development, and organizational culture for generations to come, proving that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with someone who chooses to let their actions speak louder than their words. The story of Sergeant Isabella Castillo's transformation from dismissed outsider to legendary instructor represents more than a single moment of professional vindication. It embodies timeless truths about human potential, the dangers of superficial judgment, and the power of quiet competence to reshape entire organizational cultures through demonstrated excellence rather than aggressive self-promotion. In a world that often confuses volume with authority and confidence with competence, Izzy's journey reminds us that true expertise frequently emerges from the most unexpected sources. Her feminine appearance, quiet demeanor, and unconventional background made her an easy target for dismissal by those who equated competence with familiar patterns of presentation and behavior. Yet her perfect performance under pressure revealed capabilities that exceeded everyone else's by margins that seemed almost impossible. The lesson extends far beyond military training facilities or precision marksmanship competitions. In every workplace, every community, and every social gathering, there are individuals whose true capabilities remain hidden behind appearances that don't conform to conventional expectations of expertise or leadership. How many breakthrough innovations, transformative insights, or exceptional contributions are lost because we judge potential based on surface characteristics rather than demonstrated ability? Hamilton's initial reaction to Izzy reflects patterns of thinking that pervade professional environments across every industry and organization. His assumptions weren't malicious, they were based on pattern recognition and experience that had served him well in most situations. But his willingness to publicly challenge someone whose qualifications he didn't understand reveals how easily competent professionals can become trapped by their own success, using past achievements to justify present arrogance rather than maintaining the intellectual humility necessary for continued growth. The confrontation between Hamilton and Izzy illustrates a fundamental truth about human nature. We tend to feel threatened by confidence we don't understand, particularly when it comes from sources that challenge our assumptions about how expertise should look or behave. Hamilton's hostility wasn't really about Izzy's qualifications. It was about his discomfort with uncertainty and his need to maintain a worldview where his own capabilities represented the standard against which others should be measured. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of this story lies not in Izzy's perfect performance, but in Hamilton's response to being proven wrong. Rather than doubling down on his initial judgments or finding ways to minimize her achievement, he demonstrated the kind of intellectual courage that transforms professional disappointment into personal growth. His willingness to apologize, learn from someone he had underestimated, and fundamentally change his approach to leadership and training represents the difference between defensive ego and genuine professionalism. The transformation of Camp Thunder Ridge's culture following Izzy's demonstration provides a blueprint for how organizations can evolve from competitive environments that reward individual dominance to collaborative cultures that enhance collective capability. The shift from betting pools and ego-driven competition to study groups and peer mentorship programs illustrates how exceptional individual performance can catalyze systemic improvements that benefit everyone involved. For women in male-dominated fields, Izzy's story offers both inspiration and practical guidance. Her decision to maintain her feminine appearance while pursuing excellence in a traditionally masculine domain demonstrates that authenticity and competence aren't mutually exclusive. She didn't try to fit in by adopting masculine presentation or behavior. She succeeded by being completely herself while developing capabilities that spoke louder than any external characteristics. Her approach to handling dismissal and skepticism provides a masterclass in professional resilience. Rather than becoming defensive or trying to prove herself through argument, she maintained focus on preparation and performance, understanding that true validation would come through demonstrated competence rather than verbal justification. Her confidence wasn't based on hope or determination. It was grounded in years of systematic training that had prepared her for exactly these kinds of challenges.
For leaders and managers, Hamilton's transformation offers crucial insights about the difference between leadership based on dominance and leadership based on competence. His evolution from someone who felt threatened by superior capability to someone who actively sought to learn from it illustrates how intellectual humility can enhance rather than diminish professional authority. The most effective leaders are those who can recognize excellence regardless of its source and create environments where exceptional talent can flourish regardless of conventional expectations. The story also highlights the importance of systematic preparation over natural talent or favorable circumstances. Izzy's perfect performance wasn't the result of luck or innate ability. It was the product of 14 years of disciplined training under expert guidance, beginning during childhood when learning was most efficient. Her success reinforces the reality that exceptional capability usually results from exceptional preparation, even when that preparation isn't immediately visible to outside observers. Perhaps most importantly, this story demonstrates that true strength often looks different than what we expect. Izzy's quiet confidence, careful observation, and focus on substance over style represented a form of power that was invisible until tested under pressure. In a culture that often rewards the loudest voice and most aggressive presentation, her approach reminds us that the most profound influence frequently comes from those who choose to let their actions speak for themselves. The legacy of that transformative day at Camp Thunder Ridge continues to influence military culture, but its lessons apply universally to anyone who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed based on superficial characteristics. Whether you're the quiet person in the meeting whose ideas aren't heard, the unconventional candidate whose resume doesn't fit standard patterns, or the individual whose capabilities exceed others' expectations, Izzy's story provides both inspiration and practical guidance for navigating professional environments that don't always recognize excellence in its many forms. The most powerful message embedded in this narrative is that competence ultimately transcends all superficial barriers when given the opportunity to demonstrate itself through measurable performance. True expertise doesn't require advanced advertising. It becomes evident when tested against objective standards that can't be influenced by bias, assumption, or conventional expectation. In the end, Sergeant Isabella Castillo's perfect performance that day accomplished something more significant than qualifying for an advanced training program. She proved that quiet strength, systematic preparation, and authentic confidence could triumph over loud arrogance, superficial judgment, and institutional bias. Her legacy reminds us that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who change everything, not through what they say, but through what they accomplish when given the chance to show the world what true excellence actually looks like. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.